My guest today is Ben Jackson, an international award-winning magician who was one of the youngest magicians to win first place at the World Magic Seminar's International Close-Up Magic Competition in Las Vegas, Nevada. He's also been featured on NBC Today's alongside David Copperfield and won first place in the People's Choice Award and the Medal of Merit, an honor that has only been awarded 7 times since 1902. He has an awesome story and many other awards you can check out on his website, benjacksonmagic.com. Ben joins me on my podcast to break down his journey with magic and how we can all learn to think like a magician. Because, as you'll hear him say at the very end, a magician can give someone the reminder that the world is full of possibilities and that nothing is impossible. I really hope you enjoy this episode. It's been awesome for me to speak with a magician and learn exactly that. How do we think like a magician and remind ourselves that when we're thinking and living out of a state of possibility and awe and wonder, we're also functioning and living in a state of health and possibility and living a lot more fluid and empowering life rather than a stressed one. Take care and enjoy. Ben Jackson, thank you for taking your time to come and speak with me on my podcast today.
Solomon, happy to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Awesome. Well, to start, I'd love to share that my podcast is generally aimed around whole health, holistic health, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And I've always been a fan of magic growing up, and I've watched a little of your videos and listened to your TED Talk. Haven't had a chance yet to see a show, given the circumstances.
Sure.
But nevertheless, one thing I wanted to incorporate and have you as a guest on my podcast is because I found your TED Talk on like thinking like a magician, and that was like 8 years ago. But then the different
Yeah.
messages and things that you share is very, I think, very adaptable to also just mental health. Because when somebody is in a state of surprise, in a state of wonder and curiosity, the mind is almost like open and in a place of receivership and able to make a lot more connections, because then the brain, the person is in a present moment. They're watching your tricks as opposed to worrying about something that happened or may happen. And so that's the connection I wanted to make, as far as if anybody's curious, and if you're curious, what's a magician doing on a health podcast.
Sure.
But just to get started, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, how you got into magic, and all the different things that kind of unfolded in your journey to that led you to the very well-known magician you are today.
Oh, yeah. Well, I appreciate you thinking of me and contributing to the podcast.
Yeah.
I think I have a story that's very similar to a lot of magicians. I was about 8 years old, visiting some family friends in Kansas, a young, impressionable kid. And every year we'd make this yearly pilgrimage out to Lawrence, Kansas to spend some time with our family friends, the Sampsons. Sorry about that. I'll talk to you later. I'm on with Solomon right now. I'm on with Solomon. Golly. Anywho, we would make this trip out to see our family friends, the Sampsons, for Thanksgiving. And after Thanksgiving Day dinner, we all gather around the dining room table. And my dad's good buddy, Blaine Sampson, who is not a magician. He was, he's a magic enthusiast, lover of magic, and a hobbyist and an amateur performer who knew a couple of great routines. Anyway, he busted out a deck of cards after dinner, and it absolutely blew me away. He took my brain out of my skull, put it in a blender, and hit frappe. That's how I felt. It was fantastic. And it wasn't just something that, that fooled the kids. He got one over on the kids. He got one over over the entire room. And at that point, I'm like, gosh, my parents are the smartest people in the world, and they don't know how it's done. And so if I had to pinpoint a moment in time when my fascination with magic began, that's it. Jaw open, brain in a blender, and then ultimately denied by Mr. Sampson when I asked him the question, how did you do that? And that was how that journey got started. I kind of had a passive interest about magic. I would pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. And then it didn't really rekindle and take a big hold of me until I was about 15 years old. And I was in the lunchroom in high school, freshman in high school. I saw this guy in my geometry class doing a card trick for a couple of my fellow students. And I walked up to him after he was done and I said, "Hey man, I couldn't help but notice that was a pretty nice Elmsley count. Was that a Hoffman pass?" And I'm dropping code on him. So he's like, "Ah, you're speaking the language. You know what's going on. Okay, you're one of us." And we kind of formed this friendly, not rivalry, but just a bond, a friendship of trying to improve our techniques that we would know. And he was mainly the teacher in that situation. He gave me a lot of resources, a lot of books, a lot of videotape to say, hey, like there's some great learning tools out there. And that was fun. So man, I would spend hours and hours, day in, day out, in front of my mirror at my house and just working on sleight of hand. And I talk about, I have a monthly one-man show at the Four Seasons Hotel where I play the piano in the show. And I educate the audience to say that when people think about magic, oftentimes they kind of dismiss the skill that's required to be a magician. People say, magicians, you buy your talent. You go to the magic store, you buy the prop, you buy the gizmo, you buy the gadget. But it's actually very similar to a musician. Musicians, they sit at the piano bench, they practice the scales hours and hours and hours. The magician stands in front of the mirror at his house and he works on his technique for hours and hours and hours. But as opposed to a musician who can appreciate the sound of his or her own music, magic has to rely on an audience. There's no magic otherwise. As much as I love to practice, it's hard for me to maintain that level of enthusiasm when I'm standing in front of my mirror at my house and saying, "Oh, how'd that happen?"
Yeah.
Do it again. So that's why magic is such a unique art form. Is that it requires an audience to be appreciated, and also what's so interesting too is that as opposed to a musician or let's say a juggler, their skill is on display. It's always evident. How do we know if a juggler is good? Well, he's juggling 8 chainsaws and he's not dropping any of them. But with magic, it's like we work so hard to conceal the skill.
Mm-hmm.
We conceal all the nitty gritty, knuckle busting maneuvers and things that no one should detect, let alone suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why sometimes I think magic is not as it's not as appreciated as an art form, simply because some people don't know the ins and outs. It's only something like when I was dating my girlfriend, now wife, her appreciation with magic only grew when I brought her behind the curtain, so to speak, and I showed her some of the methods of magic, the technique, the psychology, the misdirection, the showmanship, all of these building block elements. And when you are unveiled to that information,
Mm-hmm.
you go, wow, I didn't know it was so complex.
Yeah.
It was so fascinating. Anyway, I'm kind of going
No, it's awesome. I think I almost want to compare it as well to some kind of line of work that I'm in, which is coaching. In that, when you're working with a client, or even with like a psychologist working with a client, you can't be so upfront with somebody. You have to almost kind of conceal the kind of tricks and how do you to teach them something, to deliver a certain type of information. So I find it really, really cool all that you're saying. You gave the talk about the concealing the complexity. So what did you notice, or what grabbed your inspiration or your attention growing up in magic that built to eventually becoming into a career? Because I heard a podcast you were talking about, you originally in some line of, I think, medicine. Um, and then the whole kind of transition. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about, that what drew you into magic, and just to keep going with it, and to pursue it.
Yeah. Well, I wish it were more of a colorful story. It's not super exciting. But
I'm sure it
I
is
think
more
I
so
think
now when you can see it from a vantage point.
yeah, I think one of the things that drew me into magic, especially close-up magic, which is the
Mm.
type of magic that I perform. I specialize in visual sleight of hand magic, theatrical, emphasis on theatrical mind reading, and improv comedy in my show. So I want to make sure that my audiences are wowed, they're engaged, it's a high energy program, and they're laughing the whole way through. That's always clean and nothing that's racy or bluish material or anything that would offend anybody. So that's the type of magic that I perform. And I think that I initially fell in love with the manipulative sleight of hand based magic when I was 13 years old and I went to a place called the Magic Island. Magic Island, for those who aren't from Houston, it was in its heyday one of the premier dinner theater venues in Houston that was an Egyptian themed building. On the top of the building was a giant Egyptian sphinx head staring down at the passing traffic off Highway 59. And it was just a really, well, frankly, a very magical place. You felt like you were going back in time. And when you would go to Magic Island, it was initially a private club, and everyone was kind of dressed to the nines, cocktail attire, and it was a fancy date night out. But my parents had arranged to take me there for my 13th birthday. You know, we wore our Sunday best, and we were really excited. And I got to witness close-up magic from a really skilled professional. Scott Hollingsworth was the entertainment director at Magic Island, and he was working in one of the close-up rooms. And I think what was so mind-blowing was that he had a room of adults captivated with humble props, captivated with just a little bouncy ball, or someone's borrowed finger ring, or a simple shoelace, or a pack of cards. And I thought, man, I have a shoelace at my house, and I have a pack of cards at my house, and in my hands, they're just 52 pieces of paper that I play Go Fish with, and I have a coffee stain on just occasionally. But in his hands, he is squeezing miracles out of that deck. And he's bringing people to their feet, and people are pulling their hair out, and they're on edge, and they're exploding with laughter and guffaw, and they're gobsmacked. And I said, wow, the barriers to entry, what this taught me was that the barriers to entry to captivate a room are small. They're very small. You don't need to have the big boxes, the laser lights, the dancing girls, the big lights, the big production. You could have a whole crowd of people eating out of the palm of your hand with humble props. And for me, that was very hypnotizing.
Yeah,
But it was also, I don't know, it really gave you the confidence to say, I could do that too. If I practice, if I had this, that's the same feeling I felt when I look at a piano. Hanging out, my dad plays the piano, my sister took lessons at the piano, and I took lessons for 1 year in third grade, and then I stopped, which is one of the biggest regrets I had in my life. So if anyone's listening and you're taking any music lessons, stick with it, please. Please stick with it. It's worth it. But what I appreciate about the piano too is how simple it is. It's just 88 keys. Some are black, some are white. But it's the way that you take that tool and you manipulate that tool, you can do miracles with it. It sounds amazing. Music can be so moving. But anyway, I'm kind of going off the rails here. But back to your question. So that was what really stuck with me. And then I went to Texas A&M University. You're right. I got my degree in biomedical science. I was a chemistry minor. I was a business minor. I had thought that I may, upon graduating, pursue a degree take my degree, either maybe go to med school, vet school, or dental school. That's where everyone else in my major was doing. I wasn't really sure that's what I wanted to pursue just yet. I did a summer internship doing pharmaceutical sales, and I thought, no, that could be a job for me. I like to be active. I like to be mobile. I like to meet people face to face and have conversations, and I feel like I could be a good people person. I know the science. I have the showmanship, right? Maybe the charm that might help with you know with those sales. But and I was pretty all on board that when I graduated in December of 2009, I would get a full-time job offer. And I didn't. And the economy was kind of in the tank. And they said, look, Ben, we can't give you a job. And I thought, wow, I was really putting a lot of stock into that. And I didn't take any entrance exams like an MCAT for medical school. So I thought, well, I'm just going to have to kind of figure things out. So I got a job January 2010. Such a crazy coincidence, but the Houston Museum of Natural Science was putting on an exhibit called Magic, the Science of Wonder. And they were going to be showcasing not just magic props from the past, but they were also going to be showing live demonstrations of magic inside their exhibit. And I was able to contact the curator of the exhibit, send him some promotional video of me doing magic, and I secured a gig to work inside of the exhibit right after school. Doing magic during the day back then, 10 years ago, was uncommon. I mean, no one does magic during the day, at least at that point in my career. Now, when I do a lot of corporate conferences, they're usually weekday events. If I do trade shows, those are weekday events. But man, having an opportunity to be in front of an audience in the middle of the day and have a regular job hours from 9 to 5 and then have my evenings free, that was a big blessing. I was so excited to do that because it gave me a lot of repetition, a lot of stage time.
How did you keep up with it during school?
Oh, well, yeah, well, certainly during school. I mean, I was practicing magic every day since I was a freshman in high school up until now. So I'm 34 years old. So I've been doing it for 19 years. Um, but I never stopped. I mean, at Texas A&M, I would do events on campus all the time. I was the host for Parents Weekend, doing the variety show on
Nice.
stage. I actually started a magic club called BAM, the Brotherhood of Aggie Magicians. That was fun. So we had guest lecturers and stuff.
So
And then,
cool.
but then after I graduated, I started performing magic as my vocation
Hmm.
and picking up corporate clients, and just one event led to the next event, led to the next event, led to the next event, and then I was entering into a lot of magic competitions at that time. Yes, wizard duels are real. Wizard duels do exist, and was able to win some international awards, one of them being the World Magic Seminar in Las Vegas in 2010. I won first place for the adult close-up magic category. In that same year, the winner of the teenage close-up award was Shin Lim from America's Got Talent.
Oh,
So
wow.
I've known Shin for certainly a number of, past 11 years. So good friends. But yeah, I kind of add those line items to my resume and kept on building my career from there. So
That's so cool. Thanks for sharing. How do
sure.
you, one thing that stuck out that I thought was really cool is your impression when you went to that show when you were 13 and you picked up on like how little or how small of an item the guy I don't remember his name needed to
Scott.
captivate an audience. So how did that kind of influence your own like perception and thinking about like life afterwards? Like, do you now look at things, even small things, as possibilities, as opportunities, and different things like that? Like somebody might look at like a shoestring and not even like have a thought, oh, I could do a magic with that,
Yeah.
or even just outside of the realm of or the world of magic. When you look at, maybe you're trying to solve some kind of problem or some issue, I almost feel it seems like you're just psychology, your way to approach different problems is you can look at small details and
Yeah, it's interesting the way magicians think. There's my friend Ben Whiting, he's a keynote speaker and fellow magician. He says it pretty succinctly. He says that most people, when they come across a problem that they can't solve, they say it's impossible. That's where they stop.
yeah,
They say, I can't figure this out. But for the magician, that's where they start.
yeah,
They think of the impossible and then they figure it out. And it is so interesting because people say, well, how do you come up with new routines? How do you come up with new ideas? And it is a mindset to think about impossible things, things that never were or couldn't be, and then to bring them into a theatrical reality that the audience can appreciate. And it is interesting to think about, gosh, wouldn't it be cool if dot 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 fill in the blank, and then start to reverse engineer how it could be done. So I will tell you, I mean, it's not to be braggadocious, but some of the most clever, brilliant people I know are magicians. I mean, I know a lot of people, and I mean, I'm again from my medical background, I know some brilliant people in that field too. Some of my friends who are now, I will probably reach out for medical questions, and they're no less brilliant. But man, as far as cleverness
cleverness.
and
That's what I was.
adapting, man, magic it's
Like, how do they
really
approach? How do you? That's I I I love and how I wanted to bring it in. I love how this is the conversation is flowing. Is really that approach to life and the perception, because it's not just with magic, but when somebody is trying to solve some kind of seemingly problem in their life, being able to look at possibilities
hmm
and like you said, look at the impossible and deconstruct it. It's really just also such a healthy way to live. Can you touch a little bit more on just how does a magician think?
yeah. Um, well, I think that we we have to think very practically.
Yeah.
There's a perception that with magic, um, maybe when something miraculous happens, it's a fluke. It just you just got lucky that night. He just so happened to know what I was thinking. Um, but magicians are very well thought out and are very practical. We have to ensure that whatever trick that we're doing, it has to work night after night, event after event, gig after gig. I mean, it's so funny. Some people will come up to me and they say, you know, I bet, I bet that every night of the week, when you ask somebody to name a card, like tonight I thought of the three of diamonds, Magic Man, but I bet every night of the week the three of diamonds is always said, and that's how you do your trick. That's just the most popular card. It's psychology. And magicians are practical. And we know that we're not real mind readers. We know that we don't have real powers. So we're very kind of humble in that. We know that we don't have real gifts, but we do have the ability to create predictable outcomes night after night to ensure a magical moment. There's, I mean, I don't want to give too much away as far as, methods of magic, but there is a method for multiple outs. So this might be of interest
Multiple
to,
outs.
yeah, multiple outs.
Okay.
If I said that to a magician, he'd be like, oh yeah. If I said, hey, how was that done? What's your method? He's like, oh, it's multiple outs. Oh, okay, got it. Now, what does that mean? So what that means is I'm able to steer the conclusion of an effect based upon the audience's input. So for example, It's kind of hard to explain, but basically, here's a way without giving too much away. You are prepared for any situation.
Yeah. Fluid, so you can be really fluid.
Yes, and I can land the plane and create the impression that that is the desired effect that I had all the while. So I think that a practical application is that magicians are very prepared. We have worst case scenarios in our mind, and we kind of have like a flow chart in our mind. If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. And so we're kind of prepared for everything, while at the same time coming off as carefree, or this happens every night, or oh, was that a mistake? And some people really don't know. Was he joking with us? Was he being sincere? And but really, you hear this a lot from stand-up comedians too. Stand-up comedians, or people who are in live shows, where it's the impression of being improv and off the cuff, but it's not. It's completely scripted. They know where they're going, and I think that magicians have that unique ability to create the desired effect in the audience's mind when you have all the solutions available to you, and you're just prepared.
Yeah.
You know, you're prepared. So
It seems like it's also as much as or in aligned or balanced with all the preparation. It's also that ability to just go with the flow. It reminds me of a story I heard, one I love, about Winston Marsalis, the I believe it's trumpet, when he was doing a performance once in like a live audience, and it was like very quiet, and somebody's cell phone went off, and the guy like quickly got up and left, but it like stopped. Everybody was like and he stopped the performance, but instead of like getting angry and yelling at the person, or sorry folks, that's the end of our show, or all the different ways that would be considered understandable, instead he stopped, but then he started like playing the sound of the person's cell phone ring, and slowly brought it back into the song that he was playing. And so it was like, it's something you can't, you like what you're doing, you're playing with the audience, and it ends up, what could be looked at as an interruption ended up making the whole performance even be better than somebody could have imagined.
yeah, that's true. You're taking advantage of the moment. Something that has happened that you can't replicate. I got a great story about this.
Please.
Taking advantage of moments and seizing the opportunity. So when I was a freshman at A&M, I was quickly known as the magic guy on campus. It's like, there's Ben. And you probably wouldn't be able to find me without a deck of cards in my hand. I was always practicing, always
Sure, it
working.
helped you at parties, huh?
Oh
Getting
yeah,
the girls.
hey, that's right, that's right. And I knew this is now. Here's something about how magicians think. We will plan in advance, way, 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 way in advance, for an opportunity to arise. And when it arises, you are ready to give someone a moment that they'll never forget. That will just be impossible, but you prepared for it in advance. So I'll give you an example. When I was walking around campus, a lot of people, when they found out I was a magician, they would always go to me and they would say, hey, Ben, you know that guy David Blaine, that magician on TV, David Blaine, he does the trick where a card appears on the outside of the glass.
Yeah.
Can you do that trick? And I would always say, in my mind, I know how the method is done. It's like, well, you need to have another card, a duplicate card, already posted on the outside of the glass. And I'm like, well, sure, but, and they were like, can you do it? Can you do it? And I wasn't prepared. I wasn't prepared for that. So I said, okay, well, enough of that. I'm gonna be prepared wherever I go. So I went back to my dorm. There was kind of a common area in our dorm, and I posted a couple of, I don't know, like a 3 of hearts on the outside of the glass. Now, if you didn't know it was there, and you were in the common area of that dorm, and you looked out because one of the walls was a glass wall, you probably wouldn't recognize it. You wouldn't really see it because you're not looking for it. But there it was. There's a three of hearts on the outside of glass, hidden in plain sight. And it stayed there for months. For months. And months later, one of the resident directors asked me to do a magic show for my dorm.
Oh,
And we
wow.
just so happened to be in the area where that glass wall was, and that three of hearts was posted on the outside. It was dark. It was
Perfect.
you couldn't see through the window. It was just kind of more opaque. And I'm about to do my last trick. This goes back to your Winston Marsalis story. I'm about to do my last trick where I magically reveal a spectator's thought of card. I'm going to reveal it in a clever way. And I have my deck of cards ready to go because I have in my mind how I'm going to do the trick. So I asked some guy, sir, you can think of any card, red, black, hearts, clubs, spades, or diamonds, picture card or number card, one out of the 52, what card would you like? And he says, I don't know, the three of hearts.
Yeah. And
Now, he's not set up, he's not a plant, he's not a Confederate, he's not
yeah.
a stooge, he's a genuine spectator. And in that moment, it clicked in my mind, oh my goodness, I have prepared for this
You
moment.
created that whole experience, my friend.
Oh. And so now I'm able to put my deck of cards down, what I was going to do, and I dismissed it. And I said, you know what's so crazy? You're not going to believe this. But when I snap my fingers, your card is going to appear. I snapped my fingers, I pointed to that spot on the glass wall, and everyone saw the three of hearts, and I'm telling you, Solomon, the room erupted. It erupted. Pandemonium, mayhem. People were losing their mind. And it just was like, it became legendary. You created a legendary reputation, and it was hilarious, but it was
Once in
preparation
a
for
day.
that moment. There's another story, a very
It's
famous
so cool.
magician from the turn of the century, a guy named Max Molini, who once spotted a statesman, maybe a senator. I think he was from New York. He found his senator, and he went to a. Oh yeah, that's right. I'm getting ahead of myself. One day, Max Molini went to his tailor to get one of his jackets altered, and as he was waiting in line, he couldn't help but notice that in the queue for alterations was a jacket, and on that jacket was a tag, an identification tag. Who did this jacket belong to? And he noticed that, oh, this is from one of our state senators. One of these days, I'm going to see this person and I'm going to perform for this very important, official. And so Max Molini bribed the tailor to say, hey, I need you, and he gave him a playing card. He said, I need you to open up the lining of that man's jacket, and I want you to sew this card into the lining of his jacket. And he did. And sure enough,
That's amazing.
later, he was able to run into that senator who had me wearing that altered jacket, and and gave him an experience where the card vanished from the deck. Take off your jacket, cut open the lining of your coat, and it was inside the jacket. So it's funny that we prepare for these moments that cannot be explained.
That's the thing. What's so cool. It's more so than the trick itself. It's how it all materializes into that moment. How you in school, you have it there for months, and the trick was there for months in advance. And then the dorm counselor ends up saying, can you give a show? And everything just unfolds better than you could have imagined. And it's what I've learned. You can apply it to visualization and meditation, and how I will talk about it and have learned. with the or how I'll teach it to individuals with meditation, because you are rehearsing something that you want to experience, how in your life. And it's almost like that's exactly what you and that story that you were sharing did. It's like you're preparing for something, you know it's going to happen. And it's not like, well, if this happens, it's like you're prepared for when it happens, whenever it may be. And it's so cool. Thanks for sharing those stories.
Oh yeah, I mean, and there's another theory about magic that's kind of interesting that may lead you down the garden path to create those moments of magic by planting the seed in someone else's mind. So there's a theory in magic called the ham sandwich theory of magic. I think you'll appreciate this. So imagine two guys walking down the street. One guy turns to the other guy and he says, "Hey, I'm kind of hungry." And then the magician produces a ham sandwich. That's a pretty good trick. It's pretty good, right? But it's a whole other sack of potatoes. If two guys are walking down the street, one guy says, "Man, I'm really hungry. I could go for a ham sandwich." And the magician produces a ham sandwich, right? And achieving that clarity of effect, sometimes what magicians will do is we will plant the seed in the people's minds for them to ask us to do something when we are prepared to do that very thing. So for example, if I said, if I showed you a $1 bill and I said, I can do anything with this $1 bill. What do you want me to do with it? Now, 9 times out of 10, someone might say, turn it into 100.
Yeah.
And then the magician has to be an actor. What? Turn it into 100? Are you nuts? I mean, come on. I'm not the U.S. Mint here. I mean, I can't. Let me see what I can do. And now this seemingly just total request has become a miracle moment, but we are prepared to do that very thing. We can either steer the conversation that way, or even if they don't say that request, you can come about it in a unique way. There's another there's another way, another story with that too. There's a great another card routine where essentially you come to the conclusion of an effect and a card is destroyed. It's ripped up into 4 pieces, but somehow, even though the card has been ripped up into 4 pieces, it has changed into a different card. And it's a really stunning trick, and that in and of itself could be the end. This ripped up card that you saw was the Ace of Hearts, you now turn those pieces back over, and now they're the 4 pieces for the Jack of Spades, right? They've changed. And there was a great bit of psychology I read from this German magician. He said to be prepared for that moment, just to turn those pieces over and just kind of settle in and say, ta-da. And that's a good trick in and of itself, but to be quiet, to then stop talking. And then if you do, and you assemble those 4 pieces kind of close to each other, you're going to create the seed to plant in the spectator's mind for them to say, well, could you put those pieces back together and make a whole card? But just by the impression, just by you're not even saying it, but you're just kind of placing them there, and then you go quiet, and then they say, well, oh, wow, could you put it back together? But you're already ready for that. Yeah. So I love sometimes how magicians think. It's probably one, and I've said this in my TED Talk before, but it's probably one of the most empathetic art forms. Mm-hmm. Magicians are constantly putting ourselves in the shoes of our audience. We're always thinking, what are they going to see? What are they going to experience? Does my storyline make sense? Do you think they're going to request anything? Can I suggest something to them? Um, so that's all those things wrapped up into one, but it is really clever to get inside the mind of magicians.
How do you get into the present moment and draw your audience there?
Oh, well, very simple. I I know that the greatest gift that somebody can give you is their time. Time is the most precious resource anybody can give you because it's a finite resource. We only have so much of it, and when it's gone, it's gone. And I know that especially when I put on my monthly show at the Four Seasons, I know that I am in the present moment because of the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is these people paid to come to see you. They made the babysitting arrangements. They drove through Houston traffic. They made it to downtown. They valeted their car. They bought tickets ahead of time before they sold out. They got dressed to the nines, and now it's their date night. Maybe it's their big night out, and you owe it to them to be on, to be alive, to be in the present moment. I think by the sheer, I don't want to say pressure of the moment, but if you don't feel a sense of pressure in a good way to deliver and to give people the best experience you know how, then I don't think you should be performing, quite frankly. I mean, it's kind of a disrespect to your audience. And so that really kind of shoots through my bones pretty quickly when I go, man, don't phone it in. Don't get lazy. Don't get casual, because sometimes repetition and frequency will do that to performers. They will not give their show the same level of energy, drive, enthusiasm, and pretend as though this is the first time I'm ever saying this. I think that there's performers like Matt King out in Las Vegas, who does a residency show at Harrah's Casino and Hotel. And Mac is his character is a Kentucky country bumpkin. He wears a plaid suit. He pretends like he's the stupidest person in the room, but really he's silly smart. He's very, very smart. But every time he performs, what I can admire about Matt King is that he comes out of the gate full of energy, full of the present moment, and knowing that his audience is there to see him. And when he's saying his lines, he says them in such a way that it sounds like it's the first time he's ever said that. It's the first time, quote unquote, something's gone wrong, and you believe it, and I won't name names, but there are other probably more well-known magicians that people might recognize off the street. But if you go see them perform live, they've done so many shows, they've kind of been burned out.
Yeah.
And I think the way that you get there is that you owe your audience your best. You owe them your best. And so anyway, that's how I stay in the present moment.
A lot to learn as well, because just being able to approach every seemingly similar situation in a new way, because like the old adage says, no man steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river nor the same man. So it's really cool how that first name you mentioned is able to get in that state of fresh and newness. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I really do think there's a lot to learn from a magician like yourself in how you approach your skill and your craft, as well as how do you approach life, because magic and that state of wonder that it puts us into really is beneficial for our whole health. So thank you, Ben. How can people get a hold of you, go to your monthly show, and all that good keeping up with Ben Jackson stuff?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on, Solomon. The short answer is benjacksonmagic.com. benjacksonmagic.com is my website. That has all the information for corporate bookings, private events, and our monthly residency show at the Four Seasons Hotel, which we've been doing for 5 years now. And we're looking to resume them sometime this year as things are getting better and we can see a light at the end of the tunnel concerning the pandemic, so we're excited about that. But yeah, I think that is one of the biggest goals of one of the biggest gifts that a magician can give somebody, is that the magician can give someone the reminder of that the world is filled with possibilities.
Yeah.
And the magician can remind people in a visual metaphor that what you thought was impossible, that thing that can't be done, can be done. And it can be so profound. It can be a very profound metaphor to see something that you know can't be done. You know that's impossible. And that's what the magician in society can remind you, is that nothing's impossible. And so with that, I think it's great. I think it goes into determining your purpose and how you can fill people up with the gift that you've been given. And that's a fun part of the job.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Good, man. Right back at you. Thanks for having me on.
For sure. Thank you very much for tuning in and listening. I hope this episode brought you some really great value. If you enjoyed any of these episodes or would like to hear more, please leave me a review on Apple or Anchor Podcast. I'm always looking out for topics to learn and talk about, gifts to share, and value to bring to us all. For more updates, please check out solomonezra.com. That's SOLOMONEZRA. That's where you can also sign up for newsletters, read about blogs, and hear my different podcasts. Take care.